While making this video, I happened to read something which, though political in nature, also explains the appeal of World War II media as entertainment, in that we tend to view it as a heroic, uplifting event, as well as the fact that a lot of World War II was not in reality heroic, and none of it was uplifting. Then again, most World War II media also feels the pressure to remain entertaining. People would not consume it otherwise. So I thought I would include the following excerpt in my video, seeing as it relates nicely to what I am about to discuss in the next 30 or so minutes. For your consideration. The belief that the war of 1914 to 1918 had been the war to end war melted away in September 1939, when it turned out to have been rather emphatically the war that did not end war. In its place, there has grown a new belief in the good war of 1939 to 1945. This war, we believe, was so good that men constantly seek to fight it again, so that they can bathe in its virtue. Are you winning, son? No, I am bathing in virtue.
Follow me.
Yes, another World War II game, since we're all hyped for the sequel. This time we're doing a mainstream title. This is Call of Duty World at War, a well-known game with a nonetheless underappreciated presentation/narrative, carrying an intelligently crafted and powerful anti-war message, which I will tell you all about as soon as I'm done exterminating these vermin. So, great single-player, fun multiplayer, and zombies that hate you just for being American.
They're the Talibans of the zombie world.
How can you not love this retro classic? Yes, I said it. Retro. So let us begin. World at War has two campaigns. One is the Soviet campaign set during the last days of Nazi Germany. This one has a twist. And it is not a twist most of you know already, at least not from the same perspective. And the other is an American campaign about the war in the Pacific. Here you experience both traditional long-range combat as well as close-quarters claustrophobic encounters. So far, this is the only COD game to feature bonsai charges, which for those who don't know is when Japanese soldiers would rush out of cover to attack the enemy up close, screaming their terrifying Japanese battle cry. So, with its great mechanics, two unique campaigns, and a lot of nostalgia value, it is easy to see why so many of us remember World at War so fondly. But this video is not about why I personally like World at War, but why I think it matters, as in why it matters culturally. And I do believe it is one example of the gaming medium ascending beyond being mere entertainment, as it comes to approximate its own distinct form of art. And since I am aware that calling a Call of Duty game art will inevitably sound pretentious, I will proceed to talk about 20th century poetry. No, really, I'll begin with an essay by T.S. Eliot. For those who don't know the same things that I do, T.S. Eliot was one of the leading literary minds of his time. In 1919, he published an essay titled Tradition and Individual Talent, where he argued that tradition is not just about history, but the relationship between history and the present, and that every work of art resonates with what has influenced it and with what it will potentially influence. This applies to anything, not just high art. In Disney's animated Hercules, for example, you do not see a drunken bruiser that murdered his own children and had to cross-dress to pay a debt. Rather, you see a hero's journey or Arthurian knight Christ figure. This new iteration is not about the actual myth of Hercules, but the way we now like to imagine noble masculinity, because that is what we have learned to value throughout history. So keep that in mind. Not only does the original influence new content, but new content reinterprets the subjects of its inspiration. So how does World at War fit into this? Well, that's just the thing. It fits in a lot of ways, and it resonates with much more than you would imagine. To begin, it is part of a series that has always aimed to present a relatively authentic image of warfare, of which most games were, until then, attempts to depict the Second World War in an authentic light. At this point, you can probably tell where I'm taking the argument. The way that World at War renders the subject matter tells us a lot about the subject matter itself, or how we tend to see it. If we explore both its relationship to other COD titles and the ways in which it stands out, you will notice the emergence of something that is borderline profound. Yes, profundity in the game that got popular for Nazi zombies. Because behind the action and the mindless shooting and the power fantasy, there is something that the game does not tell you explicitly, but is also impossible to ignore once you've been made aware of it. Baseball was a psyop to train you to lob mortar shells with your bare hands. The two absolute necessities for a good COD game are that it is chaotic and that it feels authentic. Now, it is by no means a simulation, but in every way that matters, it retains those bits of realism that capture the chaos of war. As soon as you heard the first shots being fired, you know you're in for a hectic experience, as the enemy pelts you with their tanks and their guns and their bombs and their bombs and their bombs and their bombs. It gets in your head. And yes, the nade spam has made these series notorious, World at War especially, but it also serves to show the ability of these games to convey the uncertainty of combat. You stay in cover too long, you get flushed out. You get out of cover, you get shot. You shoot one enemy, and another will take his place. So it's a constant dynamic between knowing when to shoot, when to advance, and how to react when you're caught by surprise. It is about aim, reflexes, and positioning, and a good deal of luck, because nobody survives a war without it. A lot of people, myself included, got into World War II history because these series did something that films could merely show. They let us experience a facet of combat for ourselves. I'd played shooters before, but whereas those shooters taught me what it is like being a near superhuman action shad, in COD I was just an average soldier. I could not dodge projectiles, I was no faster than my enemy, and bullets did not discriminate between full health and... what was it I was saying about being an action shad? Right. With their grounded settings and chaotic battles, they feel authentic. You're given just enough tools to get the job done, but also deprived of any insurance that you're expected to survive. You're just one soldier among many. The first game mixed this with some pseudo-war movie scenarios, and it added some pure adventure segments. To this day, it remains an underappreciatedly well-paced campaign, and the second game was an all-out chaos, where the ambient consists mostly of MG42s and screaming soldiers.
You poor fascist bastards came all the way here just today!
Modern Warfare peaked by utilizing the chaotic battles from the sequel and maxing out the potential for adventure of the original. To this, it added something that COD had until then not tried to fully integrate into a major game. A plot. It was an intelligently thought out set of events with some genuinely unexpected twists, and the result was the Call of Duty franchise as we know it, or knew it. And as World at War released right after, it had a lot to live up to, with the narrative challenge being that just about everybody knows the major plot points of World War II. The only way to tell a compelling World War II historical story is to either write a war drama or an anti-war message, which is either a coming-of-age story or an homage to PTSD, none of which work without risking the pacing. Even film struggles with trying to add philosophy to war. So World at War tried a different approach. It pulled a Half-Life 2 and side Starship Troopers. Its story is not like anything else in the series, even though in every other regard it is exactly what you would imagine by COD 5. If you ignore the story, it might as well be COD 2 with better graphics. Which is by no means a bad thing, but it gets better. That World at War fits in with the rest is an argument that tells us about its influences, but the ways in which it differs can tell us about its uniqueness just as much as they can tell us about some until then relatively obscure qualities of its predecessors. And this is where our perception of World War II begins to factor into the discussion. Now, we've established that COD wants to feel authentic. It also wants to feel intense and chaotic, and it tries to let you know that you don't want to try any of this for real. World at War naturally capitalizes on all three, and in so doing it gets even more intense and even more chaotic, in presentation, gameplay-like. Its arsenal, for instance, is distinct in that it tries to get the player close to the enemy. Scoped rifles are rare. In their place you get flamethrowers, light machine guns, and Molotov cocktails. This is the first COD campaign to feature a shotgun, including the groovy kind, with 2 reload animations. World at War is the bloodiest entry between 2003 and 2010. It was also the one to introduce gore to the series. And no, it is not the glorious rage-filled gore of action shooters, but the unflattering, meaty reality of the human body disintegrating under immense pressure, which is no less glorious for the fact. Don't question it, it's art. And you'd think this would make it the most COD-like if intensity really is such an important quality, but it has actually made it the odd one out. Yes, it heightens everything COD has tried to do, but most of the titles that came after it toned this violence down. This might seem counterintuitive until you realize that cleanliness was another important detail in COD entries 1 through 4. Even at their darkest, their presentation is more like old war movies. Think to Hell and Back or maybe Kelly's Heroes, where the stakes are very real and tragedy does happen, but it is not quite so bleak, nor is any of it nearly as explicit. The emphasis is always on what happened as opposed to just how brutally it happened. World at War, on the other hand, plays a lot more like its modern cinematic counterparts. It wants to be explicit, gruesome, and brutal. It relies on these details to make its argument. Because how else are you going to convey the horrors of war to a modern dude bro audience, except by showing them all that wasted protein? Yeah. World at War is dark. It shows a lot of things you wouldn't expect to see in a video game. This goes to the extent where you think to yourself, does historical footage of actual war crimes belong in adolescent entertainment? And that is kind of the point. In spite of being sold as entertainment, it does not stop at this goal. Now, this may not have been a deliberate effect, but there are too many things working together building it up, so at the least, it is a very competent accident. Whereas most war media tries to tell you that war is hell, it also subcommunicates that hell is not that bad. People tend to stay in one piece. The protagonist survives, and he is of course the good guy, fighting for the good guys and winning the good battle for a good purpose. World at War, by contrast, tells you that war is hell, and then it continues to describe what hell is, over and over. In a way, it plays like a demoralizing response to modern warfare. It tends to mirror the missions of its predecessor, but with a less empowered spin. A totally disempowered one. For every scene Modern Warfare makes you feel cool, World at War makes you feel in all the more danger. Modern Warfare begins with a nighttime infiltration of an enemy ship, which soldiers you heroically slaughter as they sleep. World at War also begins with a nighttime infiltration, except that it is to save you from torture at the hands of the enemy. Then the former has a tactical invasion against a weaker military, which you obliterate. World at War's introductory invasion gets you stuck on the reef. Want more examples? Notice the use of darkness. In Modern Warfare, darkness is your ally as you are the predator.
These night vision goggles make it too easy.
In World at War, it is how you get ambushed in an ensuing bloodbath.
Ambush! Boom! Boom!
Both games feature levels where you're in some kind of aircraft. In Modern Warfare, the aerial level has you dropping bombs on people that cannot even see you. You can't even lose unless you really want to. The airplane mission of World at War, by contrast, has you playing as a gunner who is not only in constant danger, but you're also very likely to lose. Even the token sniper missions carry on this consistency in tone. Modern Warfare sends you on a mission where you and your captain take on an entire enemy army as elite snipers. When World at War does it, it is only because the rest of your platoon has been killed. And while All Gillied Up plays like a sneaky power fantasy, Vendetta plays like an oppressive, you merely graze that guy that one-shots you, you're constantly underrun kind of fantasy. It doesn't end in an epic helicopter rescue, but in very likely drowning in the Volga River. It is about two soldiers who lost the battle, and are just trying to enact what vengeance they can, which might as well be the title of the entire Soviet campaign. This plotline is about revenge.
He is responsible for the cold-blooded murder of men, women, and children. Not just here, but throughout the motherland.
Reznov established himself as a figment of a vindictive memory in Black Ops, but that is pretty much what he is here as well, with some rather grim implications at that.
This place once echoed with conversations of friends and lovers. No longer. Mark my words, comrade. One day things will change. We will take the fight to their land, to their people, to their blood. This way.
The very next level is titled Their Land, Their Blood. Reznov narrates that the tides have turned and now the Germans are the defensive. This campaign is not at all interested in Stalingrad and Kursk. It doesn't care about liberating Soviet territory. We are the conquerors now, and it appears we have been captured by the enemy again. But not for long.
Dmitri! Finish those rats!
Once again,
You cheat death.
our tanks are ready to smash this line, and
Chernov! I am not hearing gunshots.
There is no point, Sergeant. They are already bleeding to death.
then maybe our friend will help them bleed faster.
And indeed, I will help them bleed. I actually graduated medieval medicine, and they won't be getting the plague. Once we've crossed the stream, we can choose whether to go left or right. The game has several instances like these, where a level can be ever so slightly altered by going one way or another. Sometimes they're subtler, like in this mission here. I can imagine playing this in co-op could lead to a nice crossfire. And while I haven't tried co-op, I can tell you it works just as well in single player, as it opens up the levels and it adds some variety to playthroughs. I went to the left, by the way, because Soviet conscripts have no rights. While the gameplay is absolutely spot on so far, there's one thing that I'm not sure I like. The tanks. The first two CODs treated tanks as mini-bosses. They were formidable units in just about every encounter. World at War treats them as mostly a reason to show off its explosive arsenal. There is always an anti-tank weapon nearby, and you take them out with a scrap load. Not that I'm complaining. Now, I'm not saying I'm psychic, but when I see a Panzerschreck propped on the fence right in front of a tank-sized barn, I'm not seeing a determined future. I am seeing the determiners of future. This is basic metaphysics. Over at the Pacific Front, though, we have another kind of war altogether. Things get up close and personal, as the enemy uses traps and ambush tactics to get the drop on us. Half the time we can't even see them in the grass, so much so that we have resorted to heavy bombardment and flamethrowers. It is a bloody campaign, and living through it is not at all easy. We're taking heavy casualties, nobody wants us here, and it's not even like we're dying to protect our own. But at least wait, what did we achieve?
How many Marines did we lose taking this rock?
Already too many.
Relay the message to Major Gordon. The artillery on the point has been knocked out.
Hold up. It's a jungle. We have no home front. We hold the coastlines. They hold the highlands. We're using napalm. Is this Vietnam? Now, it is clearly not the Vietnam War, but I think you can see the pattern. While it is impossible to tell if it was a deliberate analogy, it is no doubt an interesting analogy. The themes in both the American and the Soviet campaign have an element much removed from the themes so far covered by these series. There is not much heroism here. It is all bleak. In other games, you fight either to liberate your own land or you fight to liberate foreign countries. In World at War, the two campaigns have you either enacting war crimes in the name of vengeance or fighting on otherwise deserted islands, liberating nobody and dying over a little chunk of dirt. So pick your poison, the nihilism of the West or the savagery of the East. Or you could get both. It is called real life.
Fortune smiles on us. In Berlin, the Germans will truly see what they have unleashed. In the midst of all the blood, the bullets, and the dead, I found that an old friend was still very much alive. Dmitri Petrenko. I saw this man cheat death time after time at the siege of Stalingrad. As long as he lives, the heart of this army cannot be broken. He makes us all proud.
So there you have it. As long as this character lives, the heart of the Soviet army cannot be broken. I hope nothing horrible happens to him in the next game. But as I was saying, this theme is ruthless vengeance. The only reason you may feel heroic is because you have bought into the narrative. The game allegedly even goes far enough to downscale the German soldiers so it looks like you're fighting kids, which is either a serious war crime or just CSGO matchmaking.
Don't tell me to shut up. You're supporting an AFK retarded homosexually disabled fuck.
Even a soundtrack, as Tommy Rossetti 9434 has noted here, sounds more like a threat to the Germans than glorifying the Soviets. These levels are meant to have you feel exhilarated at crushing the enemy, all the while possibly sensing that you may not be doing this for heroically noble reasons. This one is an interesting character. People don't usually talk about him, but that just goes to prove the best is not always the best known. His name is Chernov, and his role is the nerd that gets yelled at a lot.
Chernov! I'm not hearing
At least at first sight. The thing about Chernov is that while he looks sloppy and almost comedic, his role is actually the everyday straight man character. Whenever he voices an opinion, all he really does is he offers a sane perspective to Reznov's brutality.
Sergeant Reznov, you seem to relish in the slaughter. I've seen my friends die in front of me at the hands of this bird. They deserve everything they get, and more.
On the outside, it seems like he gets everything naively wrong, but the only reason to assume that is if you decide to uncritically trust Reznov right away.
Wait! He may help us! He can die for us! Mudak! This is not war! This is murder! This is how you end a war, Chernov!
If you are to appreciate the character who thinks for himself, you need to first think for yourself. Reznov is especially irritated by Chernov's journal.
Which do you think will lead us home? Writing about this war or fighting it? No one will ever read this!
Now keep in mind that Reznov is the one who tells this story. He narrates the beginning of each Soviet mission, and his speeches are proclamations of power and righteous vengeance.
There, we will ensure that every sacrifice is repaid in blood.
His relationship with Chernov is a case of the person who makes history being seriously annoyed with the person who records history. And while this may not have been deliberate, it is a good illustration of the indignation some people feel towards revisionism. It messes with the narrative they like.
When the flag of our motherland flies atop the Reichstag, all of Berlin will know that the evil of the fascist Reich has been wiped from the face of the earth.
Yeah.
So stateside, Pacific side, we're back playing out a preemptive vengeance in anime. We're low on men, we're low on ammunition, and we're low on morale. But at least we're not low on weak references. Poor fascist Bakas came all the way here just to The first time I played this, I was impressed to see the game start me off with a flamethrower, and then with a light machine gun. And then it gave me a flamethrower and a light machine gun at the same time. Now it can be doubly as, serious about the anti-war message. And speaking of guns, I don't mean to make it sound like a gun nut's power trip. While power weapons do steal the show, they don't behave like what you would expect out of so-called power weapons. They have recoil, as does everything else, and standard issue equipment is no less effective. They all pack a punch, and they all kick back hard. For the most part, you either tap or you burst fire. Full auto is rare, and only at very close range. This is an anti-Rambo game, and a gunplay is built to reinforce that, even as you wield Ramboic guns, which might have been both a blessing and a curse. While weapons do feel more authentic, this has been done at the expense of character. Yes, weapon character. In COD 2, for example, the PPSH was an inaccurate spray and pray close-range beast. It encouraged you to rush the enemy, like what you would imagine of the Soviet stereotype. The MP40 by contrast did not allow for the same kind of aggression, but it was significantly more accurate, and it dealt more damage. German engineering, if you will. Here, they're both rather subdued in that sense, as they behave like tactical SMGs. You keep your distance, and you burst fire. They're different stats, but neither really makes you change your playstyle. The MP44 has also lost its status as the best of any arsenal. When everything else behaves like an assault rifle, the actual assault rifle does not feel that impressive. Though they went all out on the M1 Garand, with a fixed bayonet and a grenade launcher attachment, not to mention the reason we'll sim for it. This is another one of those segments where you pick one of two routes that make me wonder how this would look in co-op. I can imagine it would be cool to have one player on the right side and another on the left, cleaning out each other's lanes. But co-op is only for people with gamer friends, with many friends, dare I say, a deluge of partners with whom to partake in social activities, including, but not limited to, the gaming pastime. A true connection, perchance. By the way, I didn't cover the vehicle missions. The tank mission is the one where we have both a tank and a flamethrower. It is supposed to play like a total power fantasy catharsis, except that it plays like a backseat driver simulator. The Black Cat's mission is easily the better of the two, and possibly the best aerial mission in any COD to date, alongside the one in United Offensive. You get to shuffle between turrets and fight Japanese Zeros, kamikazes, and U-boats as you get down in the thick of it to try and save your people from drowning. Yeah, that is why they call us Black Cats, because we're not afraid to get wet, and we're altruistic to the bone. We barely survive and we head straight for the sky. Now here I could make a Ghibli studio reference, seeing as we're in an aircraft and this has to do with Japan, but I am not going to. Instead, I will show you a gif of Gimli the Dwarf, son of Jloin. Next mission, we start off hungry and without ammunition, which is like a Soviet yin-yang now that I think about it. We need to get supplies and then rush for the trenches as we get ambushed immediately after. And this mission might be one of the best levels in the series. You start off clearing a tunnel to get you warmed up, and then the level opens to this slope where you encounter both long-range riflemen and banzai charges. And for a game that generally discourages sniping, the scope here is your best choice. It is so fun to take these effective pot shots at the enemy. You move on to the interior of your castle and eventually to this little maze-like courtyard thing. If you're an expert in Japanese architecture, feel free to let me know what it is actually called. And I'll let you know what you're called. Weeb. So yes, this is a bit over the top, though it still feels somewhat grounded because of the difficulty, and the carnage is almost cathartic as you know you're nearing the conclusion of the campaign. We at last come to this section, and having remembered we're the good guys, we decide to take prisoners of war.
On the ground now! What's that? Keep those hands up! Shit!
But we find out too late they were faking their surrender. I shoot one of them, but the other two kill our sergeant.
Miller! They killed the Sarge! The bastards killed him! You sons of bitches!
You warmongering savages. Have you animals never seen Princess Mononoke? And this is how this campaign concludes. First you use your guns to repel a counterattack, then you designate targets for artillery to repel the counterattack harder, and then you watch default war drama conclusion number 3.
Everything that was asked of us, we've done. Every night we lay in a filthy foxhole praying the enemy won't slit our throats. Every day we've spent crawling through the mud and the dirt when our bullets whistle all around. This is the enemy's last stand. When we take Shuri Castle, we go home. All of us.
And so we have won the war in the Pacific. It was a futile sacrifice in one sense, but in another sense we were an essential congregation of pawns on a much bigger board. We're still heroes for our courage, or at least that's how we're supposed to feel about it. On that note, if you want to see some high-quality non-combat war drama about the war in the Pacific or its aftermath thereby, you might want to watch Flags of the Fathers. But you know what? It's April 1945, and its Soviet allies have survived the calamity at the subway station. COD 1 did it first, and Company Furious 2 will do it again, but none of them come even close to having a presentation as epic as this one. The atmosphere is just bleak enough to signal the desperation of the other side, and the choirs are just loud enough to signal the triumph of the winners, with just a tinge of apocalyptic foreshadowing. You fight through the streets of Berlin until you get to the Reichstag, and you see that there is one major flaw with it. It has no Soviet flag on top. We make a final push up the stairs to the Parliament building, and Chernov gets the nice confused average Joe getting annihilated conclusion. His dyer, however, seems to have been spared the immolation, because flamethrower fuel can't melt steel pages. And this is the twist that most people familiar with the game probably know already. It is also the thing that I don't think has been discussed from the correct point of view.
April 30th, 1945. When he first spoke of Dmitri, Reznov told tales of a hero. Someone we should all aspire to be like. At times, I have seen him show mercy, and at others act with complete brutality. I do not understand him. Perhaps heroes need not question their actions.
Now for those who don't know, depending on how you play, you can get one of 3 variations read to you from Chernov's journal: heroic, neutral, or barbaric. It is not overtly stated, but much like a Star Wars fan when you tell them the prequels are better, you prefer Star Trek anyway, or you don't drink soy milk, World at War judges you. In Vendetta, there is a point at which Reznov uses a platoon of friendlies to bait the enemy general into fleeing his HQ. He tells you to stay quiet and let them sacrifice themselves for the higher cause. If you obey, you get a negative point. If you reveal your position, you will get an altruist point. In Their Land, Their Blood, Reznov asks you to do what Chernov couldn't. If you decide to spare the wounded Germans, you're on your way to the good ending. And finally, there is the Molotov section.
These men are trying to surrender! Look around you, Chernov. Do you think these men will be denied their revenge? That comes only 2 ways. Fast or slow. Dmitri, it is your choice.
Now you could burn these people alive, or do nothing and let your friends burn them alive, but you can also shoot them to spare them suffering. And that morality system sounds like a neat little twist, until you realize that it makes no sense. You do something pointlessly reckless, you refuse to kill dying people, and then you kill people who are about to get killed anyway. And that is what makes you a hero. You fight through the Reichstag, you take down their symbols of oppression, and you put up your symbol of oppression. That is the conclusive level. It is epic, a bit anachronistic, and ultimately fitting for the tone of the game. You're crushing the enemy, but this being the last line of defense, they fight ferociously. And the end cutscene is quite literally the end of the war.
And indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion, a better world shall emerge out of the blood blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. Give man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish of freedom, tolerance, and justice.
But we're not done with the morality system. It sounds so counterintuitive. When you're told to keep quiet, keeping quiet is the wrong choice. When you're ordered to kill people, killing them makes you a savage. And doing what everybody else was already doing confirms you as a non-hero. World at War judges you for doing what the game itself suggests you ought to do. That's either really poorly thought out, or it is brilliant. And there is enough evidence to argue for the latter. It becomes clear as you begin to notice details that the game pretends to downplay. The execution of prisoners of war, Reznov's unquenchable hatred of the Germans, and his unrepentant awareness of it. This prevailing contrast between the dark apocalyptic ambient and the heroic narrative in the foreground. The color palette here is not just a 360-era cliché. That trend developed later. In World at War, it has a purpose. The game acts as if it is itself indifferent to what you witness, with brutality that happens regardless of whether you notice it or walk by it. I didn't think I would get to commend a Call of Duty game for environmental storytelling, but there it is. Early Treyarch pulled Half-Life 2. Now, a lot of games like these claim to be anti-war, but they tend to conclude with a positive victory screen which ultimately redeems it. Instead of a needless tragedy, the happy ending converts war into a laboriously earned victory. The hardships endured become great feats of courage instead of tragedy, and the enemies you have slain were not unfortunate people stuck in a conflict they did not cause, but faceless monsters, at which point any anti-war message is lost. World at War is a notable exception. Not only are its conclusions too grounded to fall for the cliché, but the hidden morality system makes a case against some of the core principles of the military, against blindly following orders, and against heroic narratives. But do note, in spite of the commentary, it does not downplay the courage of the soldiers who put their lives on the line. The people who fought are still heroes, but they're heroes for their bravery, not for their brutality, and certainly not their obedience.
The best research tells us that obedient children are happy children.
Yeah.
Which is the most commendable thing about World at War. All of its other qualities stand. It looks great and it is very fun to play. Campaign, multiplayer, and horde mode. Add to this the modding scene, which makes impressive maps that look and feel like official Treyarch maps, and you also get a great community on top of the many hours of survival and multiplayer fun. Here I was going to single out top 5 custom maps to try out, but there are so many that I can't really narrow it down to just 5. Because they are all so professionally made, and I know intent really can reach that level. Basically, I like the half of them double so much that they must earn it. Or the double. No, you're not having a stroke, I'm just reading this legend from a modding competition. The point that elevates the experience into something special, however, is this subtle claim interwoven within everything else. That a medium about adapting in a culture that pretty much demands that one adapts to it, implicitly argues against this complicit take on morality. A hero is not one who succumbs to circumstance, but to one who rises above it. Chernov's conclusions indicate as much. The good ending portrays the protagonist as exceptional, that is, as an individual, and the bad ending describes him as no different than anybody else.
His bravery on the battlefield is beyond question, but he has also shown mercy amidst the brutality of the Red Army. His merciless brutality defines him only as a savage, just like the rest of the Red Army. He is no hero.
This is a military game that redefines heroism in an anti-authoritarian and anti-collectivist light. The subtlety and sobriety in which presentation make it the kind of game that, if somebody asked me to point to an example of art in the medium, World at War just might qualify. Now, do note that I said it approximates art, because as much as I dislike saying it, it is not actually art. Annoyed as I am with people who regard the gaming pastime with contempt, I can't in good consciousness bang to the other extreme and call it interactive poetry in motion. Its immediate goal is entertainment, and its primary goal is sales. And therefore, while it may be a platform for many kinds of arts, like visual, musical, and performative, the game itself is still just a game. But it doesn't have to be art in its conception to have artistic value. As long as it tells us something about culture and something about our interpretation of culture, it is in its own way an indirect work of criticism. This matters because classic works of criticism are treated today as works of art. And as this chapter concludes in my upcoming essay, all is art that ends as art. So that has been World at War. It resonates strongly with its own series, it resonates with classic film, and it resonates with the tenements of a solid anti-war message. It features meta-commentary in the gaming medium itself, which makes it secretly resemble a game like Inside more so than a AAA action shooter. And it does it all with exceptional competence. Graphics that still hold up, gameplay that is as good as military shooters get, and the kind of class you could only expect from a late 2000s game. And yes, that is a compliment. If you've been an enjoyer of the game, I hope you have yet another reason to respect it. And if you're not familiar with it, now you are. And if there is further interest in my take on this franchise, in a future video we'll cover what appears to be either hypocrisy or a serious inconsistency in the presentation. You might have noticed some of it already, and if you did, I believe you were meant to notice it. That is, it was deliberate irony. But that is for another video. In the meantime, you can watch some of my other content, and better still, you can give a AAA company $70 to test their broken product. You can buy one of my books. I would greatly appreciate it. I have a science fiction novel for people who like H.G. Wells and giant rats. I have a ghost story for people who like English literature and metaphysics, and a psychological thriller if you're into historical mysteries, and a bit nihilistic. But I know what you're thinking. You've completed this game in Federate. You're too skilled, too highbrow for fiction, which is why I also have poetry and 2 philosophical essays. You can get print, and you can get digital for far less. I recommend Barnes & Noble if you're in the US, and Blackwell's for Europe. And if you want to chat, come say hello on my Discord server. Links are in the description. Take care, have a great rest of your day, and remember, a marksman targets one person, but a marksman targets all the people. Take that as you will. Peace.
The heart of this army can never be broken.
Things will change, my friend.